And I'm Gabriel Shipton.
Would everybody like a chair? Okay. One more mic.
You want to help with the chair?
I think we're okay.
We have one more mic.
I got it.
Okay. Perfect. So, what a remarkable film, and it's wonderful to see every seat filled. I hope this is a sign of things to come, because ultimately that is what's going to free Julian. It's not going to be governments, it's going to be people saying, free Julian Assange and free the press, as you heard in this film. Gabriel, you've done an incredible job. Also, the person who's filming right here is the one who filmed so many of the scenes in this film. Niels is the director of the And of course, John Shipton is the focus of this film, the father of Julian Assange, as well as Stella, now his wife and their children. I'm wondering first, Gabriel, if you could start off by telling us what is the latest with Julian. Where does the court case stand? Where does the extradition stand? The just shocking fact that he faces over 170 years in a U.S. prison in what the Florence Supermax people are suspecting in Colorado?
Yes, so on June 17 last year, the UK Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who's like the Secretary of State, but for the UK, signed off on Julian's extradition after the US appealed what you saw in the film, the win at the magistrates level, and the US won at the High Court level. And after Priti Patel signed off on the extradition, Julian has one more avenue in the UK courts, and he has to apply for an appeal to the UK High Court. And that appeal is on Priti Patel's decision, but also on all the substantive press freedom grounds that the judge ruled in favour of the US at the magistrates level. So that application was submitted, and the US responded, the US DOJ responded, and the judges have had everything they need to make a decision on this application since the end of October. And so for these past 5 months and for the past 4 years, there's this sort of veil of legality that has been, a very thin veil that's put in front of Julian's persecution, because he remains in this hellhole in the UK while this whole process, this never-ending extradition process, drags on, and as Amy said, the threat of 175 years in Florence, Colorado. I think we had a section in the film to show you, I think the warden calls it worse than hell. And that's hanging over Julian's head, and that's what he lives with day to day, that these judges could make a decision and he could be on a plane within a few days.
And John, a lot of this film, Niels and the other videographers filmed during COVID, during the pandemic. You weren't allowed to see Julian for 6 months, but now you can, and Stella can visit him and the children. Can you talk about his state of mind? We see at the end that he suffered a mini stroke.
Well, we divide this into a couple of... He's always pleased to see Gabriel and me, and always elevates his mood to discuss possibilities and where we are, and when he brings up, he gets 10 minutes, and then it's guillotine. So when I tell him about Amy Goodman, who he's met a few times, and you all here in the, I've adopted that, you all here in the theatre. This elevates his state of mind. But the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture and Unusual Punishment, Professor Nils Melzer, in 2019, with 2 doctors, experts. Their expertise is in the area of psychological torture, visited Julian and did a review of Julian's health and mental state in the prison, in Belmarsh prison. At that time, Julian was held in what they call the health wing and what the prisoners call the hell wing, principally because you're not any longer in association. So having people to relate to is really important. In the hell wing, you're completely isolated. This furthered Julian's depression to the extent where in court evidence it was revealed that he had secreted a razor blade into his underwear. The testimony of Professor Coleman was that should Julian be shipped to the United States, he would find a way to suicide because the circumstances here fundamentally anti-human for a person who has been charged with espionage charges. The rules are that if you have read classified information, then you can be put under SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. Those are administrative decisions and they're not available to appeal to the court. They're in Colorado Supermax, there are 20 of these cells in a row where they keep people on SAMs. At any given time, there are about 80,000 people in the United States prison system in total isolation. In the SAMs, where he would likely be, although the United States prosecutor has given assurances, those assurances are meaningless because they're the prosecutor's assurances in the first place, and in the second place the codicil at the bottom indicates that at any given time they can change their mind. Prosecutorial assurances are meaningless in the circumstances of state-to-state relationships. They have to be through diplomatic sources, not a prosecutor saying we won't do this, that or the other. Several times, anyway, I don't want to make it too long. Now, to describe to you the reality of SAMs is that they're in a single cell 24 hours a day. There's one door which is steel, there's another door which is wood. They're separated by about 8 inches. Each half an hour, the jailer comes along and looks through a slot to see that you haven't attempted to suicide, or if you are attempting to suicide, to save your life. The purpose of this is to keep you in a place worse than hell. Total isolation is worse than hell. There's an example, grim this is, there's an example in the court case of the prosecutor standing up. This is a woman from Dublin. It's got a Northern Irish accent, standing up and saying it's not so bad in Sam's because Abu Hamza demanded that his toenails be cut before he went to a court appearance, and the jail cut his toenails for him. Abu Hamza has no arms. No arms. So that's the circumstances of Julian's potential in the United States and why we, his family, and all of our friends and supporters fight tooth and nail in order to keep him out of the hands of that sort of circumstance that I described. Yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, we were at Georgetown. As you know, Georgetown is a university that trains diplomats. The diplomatic service fills itself from Stanford and Georgetown. We were on a panel, and one of the people was an FBI whistleblower representative, and the other person had 2 professorships, by the way, and she was from the Department of State. Both asserted, well, why does he keep on fighting these cases after case after case? Why doesn't he come to the United States? And they assert these things in such comfort and such elevated. You get the feeling that they actually elevate themselves above the actuality of the result of their decisions that they take day to day in state, in the particular part of state, the national security section of the Department of Justice. I hope that goes some way to answering the question.
A number of newspapers won major prizes, like Pulitzer Prizes, for publishing and analyzing the documents that they worked with Julian on. It took a few years, but now the New York Times, El País, the Guardian,
Le Monde,
and Der Spiegel have written a letter. I don't think the Guardian was in this list, right? They wrote a letter, that way they were part of this letter, calling on the Biden administration to drop the charges against Julian Assange. How did Julian respond to this, and how significant is this? They're calling on the Biden administration to do this. Is there any chance of that? And did it have an effect on the British court?
Well, I think it's incredibly, significant. These people who collaborated, or these prestige media newspapers that collaborated with Julian, are finally, coming together to demand this be dropped. And I think, it's because they realise, or they're beginning to realise, that this Espionage Act prosecution is actually a threat to them as well. And they're trying to protect their own interests as Julian's options start to run out in the UK. So, obviously Julian was very pleased with this effort. There was always some little weasel words in these letters which could have been done better, but I think on balance, it was positive, and you could see almost instantly the effect that it had, because the next day in the Australian Parliament, John was actually in the Parliament lobbying the Australian government to do something for Julian, and an MP on the Parliament floor asked the Prime Minister what he'd been doing, and he said publicly that he'd been making representations to the Biden administration.
In fact, wasn't he just with President Biden?
Yes, that's right. They were just in San Diego signing $200 and something billion worth of military equipment. and bases over the next 30 years. But yes, I think you could see, that letter gave some cover to the Australian Prime Minister to make these public statements. 10 days later, I think it was December 10 or 12, this Press Freedom Coalition, which includes ACLU, CPJ, Amnesty International, 24 of the largest NGOs in this country, all went on to write a letter as well to the Garland administration, and now you are seeing a congressional Dear Colleagues letter being circulated in the Congress that's led by Rashida Tlaib. So this is, it's like the snowball effect. For so long, Congresses, particularly the Democrats, have been silent on this, while every single parliament in the Western world has a group calling for Julian's freedom. And Congress is like the ones who are late to the party. But finally now we're seeing this group forming, and we're hoping that the snowball continues to roll. And I don't know if you saw people doing their town halls, candidates starting their town halls now. And we had great success in Australia during our campaign there, during the election period, where people would go to these town halls, Julian supporters or people who cared about this issue, and they would ask the position of the candidate at these town halls. And eventually, one by one, these candidates were saying, we agree the charges should be dropped, the charges should be dropped. So just yesterday, or actually the day before yesterday, Pramila Jayapal, the head of the CPC, was asked at one of her candidate town halls, or her town hall meeting, and she said yes, that the charges should be dropped. So I think you're seeing this snowball effect that we hope builds as we tour around the country as well. John and I will be doing 52, I think we've done 17 so far, but we're doing 52 events in total. So yeah, just keeping that momentum and keeping that, that presence and, the media and all that sort of thing to help this really keep rolling on till Julian is free.
And on that note, you can tell friends, because word of mouth is what does it, and organizing, that this film will continue to be here.
Yes, so I think there was some mention that it would play again, but
We want to bring it back next weekend because, when you sell out the house, you want to schedule more shows for those who got turned away tonight.
And tomorrow, if you have friends in Long Island, tell them to go to the Huntington Community Cinema. On Sunday, it's Sarah Lawrence.
yes, and then
And Monday, it's Alamo Downtown.
Yeah, Alamo Downtown, and it'll be running, it has a week-long run in the Alamo in Lower Manhattan as well as the Alamos all across the country. So
We want to also open up this discussion to all of you, so feel free to raise your hand. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Great film and presentation. I was wondering if anyone cares to speculate as to why it's taking so long for the current appeal to be decided.
Why is it taking so long for the current appeal to be decided?
because they can, they can. There's no deadline. They can take as long as they want, and that's what they're doing. Just to set this example, to show to everybody that we can act with impunity. That this is what will happen to you if you publish this sort of information. That you'll spend 5 months waiting for what should be an easy decision, for a judge to approve an appeal application. That's why.
And also think about the message that this sends, especially to journalists.
Yeah.
And John, maybe you can comment on this. Every day that Julian is in jail, and it goes beyond the 4 years at notorious Belmarsh prison. Don't forget, he was cooped up at the Ecuadorian embassy for years, for 7 years before that.
Well, if I could start. there's a shimmering golden thing that stands before their eyes of all of us. Two items really. One you could call pearl if you like, set in gold, and another a ruby or
Put the mic right under
a
you.
ruby or a diamond set in platinum. Those two things are the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, categorically allowing, forbidding the government to make rules about speech. The other is from Thomas Paine, the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment is copied around the world wherever a population can bully in Western parliaments, Western societies, wherever we can bully a government into it. In the case of Europe, they have Clause 10, Section 10, which allows for free speech, but it is categorised. So you can say whatever you like as long as it's not this, that and the other. The Bill of Rights, we haven't yet seen. We discuss it in Australia every election. The parliamentarians say this is a great idea and then go back to sleep or whatever they do. So the blighting or the smearing, if you like, to keep the shimmer, the image of the shimmer before our mind's eyes. The smearing of that, the reduction of that reflection back into the American society and culture by the oppression of publication with a threat held before every publisher. The one sitting alongside us must be aware that they can be tried under the Espionage Act. Now, you may not get a conviction, but in the case of Julian Assange, is an example that chills and gives shiver, because a publisher can't. We've spent probably, 15 million, and another 15 million to go. Hundreds of thousands of people all around the world, a family traipsing the world, making films, having meeting after meeting, to save one man. Every publisher sees that and are aware of that. Ken Schulzberger, if I pronounced his name, the publisher of the New York Times, the publisher signed that letter in full awareness that if it's not stopped, if the example, they're already chilled, that the fight back must come to relieve the pressure on the First Amendment, now dealing with the Bill of Rights, due process, human rights. So the Bill of Rights instituted gave birth to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under Eleanor Roosevelt, an Australian first President of the United Nations named Herbert V. Evatt. It's adopted in its entirety into the Council of European Human Rights, and all of the nations of Europe, including the UK, embrace human rights in their national legislation, runs parallel to other legislation. Every single one in the case of Assange has been abrogated. They take no notice. And due process example I'll give you rather quickly if you'll indulge me. Julian at the hearing was put in a glass box. The glass box at the back is for terrorists. It has a raised floor about that high. Okay. He sits raised above it. It has glass and a slot about that wide, about 1.5 inches every 2 feet, like that. the prosecutor and the Department of Justice solicitors, or lawyers, attorneys as you call them, sit in the well of the court alongside the prosecutor. Julian's lawyers sit in the well of the court. They make application to the judge that Julian, as he's no danger to anybody, he just uses a pencil or a keyboard, to sit in the well of the court alongside his barristers to enable instruction, conversation private. The judge says you'll have to make a bail application to move Julian from there into the court because we're not in charge. The court's not in charge of Julian. Who's in charge of Julian is the jail. Make application to the jail to move Julian into the well of the court. They say no. Actually, Julian is in the custody of the transport company that takes Julian from the court back to the jail. So this bureaucratic ossification of possibility, Julian has to stay in the glass box to give instructions. The solicitor comes along, or the barrister comes along, and stands on their tiptoe, and he whispers through the slot, which we all in the court, we can hear it even upstairs in the gallery. This is not due process. Due process specifically calls for each side to be equally armed. It's a human right and a legal obligation. So I demonstrate to you the abrogation of these treasures which belong to us. The First Amendment is ours, or yours, to put that properly. The Bill of Rights is yours, it's not theirs. So a vigorous defence of these elements, I'm being a bit over-vigorous myself. A vigorous defence.
Let's take this question and this question, two in a row, and then.
Yeah, I just was wondering if you've heard anything about the European.
Can you use the mic,
Court of
please?
Human Rights.
I was wondering if there's been any news about the European Court of Human Rights. We got a brief message saying that Julian's case they confirmed that it was brought before the court, but since then we've heard nothing. So I'm just wondering if it's true that it was brought before the court, and if you have any information that you can tell us about that.
And one more there.
Maybe.
Sure.
Second question. If the U.S. were to drop its charges, would there still be grounds for the U.K. holding him? Or has he been held there all along merely at the behest of the United States?
So if the U.S. were to drop the charges, would Britain free him, or could they hold him for other reasons?
He would walk free. Yeah, he's only been held in that prison at the request of the US DOJ. Yeah, so the charges are dropped, he would walk out he probably, there's a ejection order, so he'd probably be, that's been in place I think since 2016, so he'd be deported to Australia or a third country.
And how would he feel about living in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he was out of that prison, I think he'd like it very much.
And the question of the European Court of Human Rights.
Yes, so that's, they've rejected that application, saying that there's still ongoing proceedings in the UK. So but they've said you can reapply once those proceedings are done.
Next question. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Is Julian allowed any books or music of any kind?
Is Julian allowed books and music in prison?
Yes, he's allowed books. He's allowed books. Any sort of national security focused stuff, they won't let him have.
This mode of, it's quite human, you know. They don't give bookshelves, so he's got a stack of books, they go right up to the ceiling. So it ended up with growing a wall of books. And another amusing human thing is that we together decided to walk to Barcelona. Head off, I actually do it, and Julian would walk up and down his cell and mark off. But COVID came, so I couldn't do the walk, but Julian continued to his walk. And I rang him up one day and he said, "Oh, I'm just passing the border of France and Spain. You know, I'm just getting over the border today."
And as we saw in the film, Stella is from Barcelona?
Yes, that's why we were walking to, because Stella's mum and dad live in Barcelona.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, could you just give us one example, or remind us one additional time of the crimes that the United States government has done, that Julian has exposed, and just remind us one more time of a central crime that he has pointed to.
Remind us of the crimes that Julian has exposed through the release of millions of documents.
Well, there's so many.
That's why I said one.
Yeah.
How long do we have?
Well, I think, what's very important as we approach the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War is the 15,000 unaccounted for civilian deaths in Iraq, which were kept hidden because populations don't like war. We don't like to see civilians dying in other countries. So that revelation that Julian and others worked on, they trawled through these hundreds and thousands of war logs to find each of these individuals, and really showed, I spoke to some people who were on the ground in Iraq at the time, and they were so relieved when WikiLeaks started publishing this material, because they could see what was happening. They knew what was happening on the ground, and they saw that what was happening there was something different than was what was being reported back at home. And so they said to me they were so relieved when these logs came out and that the truth was coming out, that everyone finally knew what was actually going on in Iraq.
Can I just rattle off? Both Gabriel and I used this, the blessings of the revelations in Chelsea Manning. I see Chelsea as some sort of saint, actually. One of the blessings, there's 250,000 cables in the cable set. Each one of those cables can bring benefits, and many of them have been used to further understanding. Some of them, one of them was used by Rafael Correa. The United States Embassy was paying the elite police force in Ecuador when he moved into government. He was naturally anxious that the elite of the police force would move against him. So he came, having read the cables, he understood that they were paying more and came up with a solution, quite elegant. He paid everybody in the police force the same what the elite were getting, so there was a solution there. Another one, which is quite magnificent, really. In 2006, outside Baghdad, a group of American soldiers broke into a house and handcuffed the 5 children and 6 adults, 11 people, and then murdered them all. Realizing this is this is a heinous crime, they called in an airstrike and obliterated all trace of that little family and the house. Now this was written up by the United States ambassador to Iraq in the Green Zone and sent on SIPRNet. These are all classified, they're not top secret. SIPRNet, on SIPRNet to the Department of State in Washington. Chelsea Manning, having released those cables, the Iraqi parliamentarians and bureaucrats of that wrecked up, destroyed country read it. And from, I don't know where people get this sort of courage from, I tell you, it's just a mystery. They gathered their courage together, having read the cable, passed the cable around amongst each other, and determined to face the issue, and said, we are not signing the status of forces agreements, so you'll have to remove your troops, or they'll fall under Iraq laws. They'll be no longer immune from prosecution. That was my country, and your country had to remove its troops, which Obama did. So a cable leaked by an American soldier with conscience brought the beginning of an end of war. Never forget it and treasure it. Brought the beginning of an end of a war. And that war, we face the anniversary, the 20th anniversary in the next couple of days, maybe.
Monday. Well, it was the 19th New York time and the 20th Iraq time when the U.S. invaded and bombed Iraq, March 2003. Yes?
I guess I was curious to know to what extent Julian is aware of the world that stands current events and so forth, and from your knowledge, what is most focused on preoccupation in regards to current affairs? What his thoughts
What
are?
is what?
What his preoccupation or thoughts are in regards to current affairs? Like,
So what does Julian understand about what's happening in the world today around support for him?
not just, more so in regards to the inclement dangers in the world in regards to
In general, around
artificial
current
intelligence,
affairs.
other types of
Julian gets a 10-minute phone call to me, but my phone doesn't work in the United States, unfortunately. I bought a Huawei phone. I have to buy Huawei, sorry. I have to buy an Apple phone tomorrow. But usually he rings every day while we're on tour for a report, and he gets a 10-minute phone call and then it guillotines. With Stella, he gets a 10-minute phone call and then wait 10 minutes and he can ring again. And Stella keeps him up to date on current affairs. I don't mention current affairs very much. I always describe, for example, this meeting tonight. That's what so always the march forward to his eventual freedom is my obligation to describe.
I think we're going to take 2 more questions. Yes.
Amy, I have a question regarding the matter. I've never heard anyone on your show who was vaccine injured. Of 7 million people who were injured from the so-called vaccine. Now, this may be off topic, but it's the same thing. The Julians want to know.
I just want to say, it's so rare to have I appreciate what you're saying, but
Just want to get to the truth of the matter. Just saying the Julians want.
I just want to say that it's so rare to be able to have a group of people focused on Julian Assange that I think we should focus on that tonight.
Had anyone vaccine injured on your show?
I think you should look at Democracy Now! And see when we've had discussion about vaccines. Someone like, for example, Mary Holland. Look her up at democracynow.org. Last question.
Thank you.
Yes.
So yeah, it's such a heartbreaking story for someone who is on the right side of the history, and really embarrassing and disappointment for the rest of us, in my opinion. So this country has history of resistance, and there has been so many protests about when it comes to women's rights or like people of color and all that. So for this situation, what would happen if we all go on the streets and say, okay, we are all Julian Assange, and I did that. So do you think they can all arrest us?
So the question is, what if everyone went into the streets and said, I am Julian Assange? How many people would they arrest? What difference does grassroots movements make when it comes to Julian right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, personally, I think the support that we enjoy around the world from parliamentarians and world leaders such as those in Latin America and Australia wouldn't exist without the grassroots. There are a lot of these politicians. I did an event with John McDonnell, who's a UK politician, and I was trying to give him a compliment. I said, not all politicians are as principled as John McDonnell. Some just do it for votes. And John McDonnell leaned over to me, he's like, hey, I like votes too. And so that's really why we are seeing all these parliamentarians and politicians standing up for Julian. It's because of people like you all here today. So I think the grassroots I think John says it's the shoulders, it's your shoulders that we stand on as we go around and talk to these people, talk to these politicians, see these world leaders. So yeah, I think it's extremely important, and that's why it's important to sort of stay in touch. So I think Nathan and a few others here tonight have an email sign up, so you can pop your email down for Assange Defence, and you will get updates of when there are street actions, as well as other actions like calling your congressperson or letters to the editor, things like that we are always asking the grassroots to do to sort of focus that energy. So yeah, if you do one thing before you leave tonight, just pop down your email so that we can stay in touch with you.
One last question.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that it takes great courage to fight the fight, and I totally respect your struggle, and I think you're going to find great dividends, because I had a certain opinion before the 2016 element, and then I kind of thought that your brother and your son is now a hero, because if we lose sight, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, it doesn't matter. If we lose sight because the Department of Justice has weaponized everybody, and so we have to come together as a country and put aside petty differences and support you. And I am just saying that I saw this on Tucker Carlson the other night, because you can have the screening, and keep going into the media on both sides of the aisle. Keep doing what you're doing, because you're building an audience, and now, we're people in the audience are thinking, how more can we support you? Because freedom is only free. We're only, Ronald Reagan said, we're one generation away.
Why are you bringing up fascists at this meeting?
What? No. We have freedom of speech. That's the problem. So thank you. I applaud you. And we're fighting for your son and your brother. Thank
Your
you.
final comments to Julian Assange's brother and father.
Yeah, keep fighting. I think this moment is really important that we're all here together. Sign up, put your email down so we can stay in touch with you. And yeah, please tell your friends, family about the film. You can go to the website ithakamovie.com to find out where it's playing at. And yeah, keep fighting. Thank you.
And John.
Oh, thanks everybody for coming along. I believe in the logos, the word, And all it takes is just to chat amongst each other and over a beer or a dinner, husband and wife, and that builds magically and thoroughly. And who will testify to that? Democracy now. Thank you.